Hello and welcome to Shortcut to Cheika. Hi, I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, and today there came news out that Pocock, Kurtley Beale and Cooper aren't available for the England game. Two of those players for disciplinary reasons, and part of what Cheika explained was the reason behind that and why there was a no exceptions policy was that they've been taking too many shortcuts and you didn't want to do any more shortcuts. So I thought this then started to ring a theme through his career as the Australia coach. And so I wanted to talk about him as the Australia coach and his tenure there and what's been the kind of underlying story as to what's been going on. So let's start off. I'm going to take you over to my screen and we're going to have a look at his record as to where the Wallabies have been under his tenure. So he took over, obviously, well not obviously, but he took over in 2014, at the end of 2014, after I've gone blank. After Link got thrown out or resigned because of issues with players like Kurtley Beale. Ironically enough. And how did they go? Well, basically they went back, had a poor end of year tour, finishing dropping from third to fifth in the world. 2015, as you can see, quite a lot of green in there, running up to the World Cup, and they rose up to second in the world. We'll talk about how he did that. And part of the one, so I guess shortcut number one was bringing in the Giteau law, which let him bring back players like Matt Giteau and Drew Mitchell to play in the team, and that was a shortcut fix, to get the team ready for that Rugby World Cup. And you can understand how and why you might do that. And you could say, hey, the ends justify the means. They made the final, and came up just short, coming second in the final, losing obviously 17-34, as we can see here, to the All Blacks. But the All Blacks were strong favourites in that competition, so there's no shame in that, and they definitely overperformed, considering they came into the year as fifth in the world. 2016, though, and things started to go backwards. We can see a lot more red in here rather than green. So those three losses to England on their tour, followed up by a couple of losses to New Zealand, and then finishing out with a couple of losses to Ireland and England at the end of the year, meaning that they came in the year at second, dropped down to fourth, but finished at third in the world. And you could say perhaps not that disastrous. However, I mean, some of the comments that came out from him at that time was that he'd underestimated he thought he could just carry on from the World Cup, but they had a bunch of player turnover. So Giteau, Drew Mitchell, Cooper, to mention a few that had moved on. And what he hadn't done was he didn't take the team back to basics and explain to the team and train the team up as to what international rugby meant. And that was his reasoning as to why they had a poor year, and then he realised actually he had to go back to basics. So again, was he trying to take a shortcut with these new players, thinking that they would just pick it up organically? He definitely underestimated where he should have been playing. Now, at least he came out and said where there were mistakes and what needed to happen. Coming to 2017, and we got again. We come in at third in the world. We finish at fourth. It's another positional drop, dropping down as far as fifth during the year as well. And obviously, this was the tour when this is during a Lions tour, so losing to Scotland without their Lions, and not having not the strongest June test either against Fiji, including Fiji and Italy in there. So, and then towards the end of 2017, Mario Ledesma. Or at the end of 2017, Mario Ledesma left, and one of the things we've seen since he's left is that the scrum has been going backwards. But while Mario Ledesma was there for that sort of couple of years, the scrum was much improved from the Wallabies. And into 2018 then, into this year, and as we can see, a lot more red, and we've dropped now from coming into finishing last year at 4th, dropping down as low as 7th, and currently at 6th, potentially losing to England. Could drop them down to 7th again, which is, I think, it's their lowest ranking ever in the World Rugby League rankings, which started in 2003. And so that's kind of the tale of his time in charge. And one of the things that's come out this year is that if we were to look into who was the starting 10 in 2014, 15, 16, 17, I think you'll find that basically Foley had started every single test, at least since the Rugby World Cup, maybe even before that. I don't know if he got arrested in one of the Rugby World Cup games. He was had started every single game at 10. I.e., there was no depth being built there. We had one. It was definitely was reliant on one player playing 10 the whole time. And one of the things we've been saying about the Wallabies all year is that lack of depth at 9 and 10. Now, to be fair, there are other players that have been tried out at 9, and the drop off from Genia to the next, from Genia to the next 9 is quite considerable. There is somebody there. The drop off from Foley was to Cooper, Quade Cooper, who wasn't even being picked. So you've got to say that he hasn't. The long-term planning for Cheika just hasn't been there in some of those key positions. A lot of those people are saying, so what is the combination in those backs? He's had 3 years to do that since the Rugby World Cup to sort that out, but people are still asking that question. We've got, and it's not just like who are those two, but who's, in fact, any of the positions in the back. Does Folau play at 15 or 14? Where does Beale play? Does he play at 10, 12 or 15? Where does Dame Helmet-Petty play? All these questions as to who plays where, what number, isn't sorted out or clear. So that there does seem to be a lack of long-term planning. Matt Tamua being brought back and put straight back into the side shows another one of those shortcut moves. Adam Ashley Cooper being brought in as well, brought back after 3 years out of the fold, playing in sort of France and Japan. Again, another player that seems to be a short-term fix rather than a long-term solution to anything. This seems to have become part of Cheika's kind of mode operandi, or way of working, is that it's not about a long-term solution, but it's about short-term fixes. And that's a real problem for the Wallabies. Let me just come back to on screen. So as I say, those are kind of some of the key problems. And then we come to today. First off, we have the Pocock selection, and we have Cheika coming out and saying, let me read out a couple of quotes from him. He wanted another day, which obviously you'll afford to a guy like him, but he couldn't overcome it. Okay, which suggests here that it's another one of these ones where players need to be protected from themselves. What's the big goal here? The big goal here is the Rugby World Cup next year. It's not tomorrow or tonight or whatever time zone you're in, game against England. Sure, that's an important test match. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the Rugby World Cup, and getting Pocock right for the Rugby World Cup is essential for this team. There are very few players in the world who, if you're playing against them, you actually change your tactics and have to plan to play that person in a totally different way than you would normally play, or seriously adapt your game plan for him. Pocock is one of those few players that the opposition has to adapt their game plan for him. So, he's a very critical player. The next bit then goes, there's a bit of me that is relieved that he came to that conclusion, because he's been copying it. He's been getting smashed in there, and no doubt they'd be coming at him again tomorrow. So hang on, you're relieved that you don't have to select him, But who is actually making this decision? Is Pocock deciding the team and picking the team, or is Cheika picking the team? Cheika needs to be having a longer term view of this. If you've got a player who is touch and go and he's that crucial to your Rugby World Cup, then tell him to go home and get fixed properly. Don't risk him in games against Italy and England because they're not the important games. The important games are next year. Sure, Australia needs some momentum. They need to be heading forward. But a guy with a neck injury and making sure he's playing next year is much more important than these two results, whichever way they go. So to me, again, that's short-sighted, short-term fix to try and win a game because the Wallabies, and not just Michael Cheika, but the whole setup from Rugby Australia downwards is under pressure at the moment because of that drop in the world rankings and because of those results. Sorry, that have led to that drop in the world rankings. So that's that side of things. Who's actually picking the team? It should be Cheika, and there should be more of a long-term plan. Players need to be looked after, need to be protected from themselves. I know people hate that, and they say, "Oh, they know their body is best." Maybe they do, but these guys are hyper-competitive, and they will play with a broken leg if they could do. So they need to, as I say, they need to be protected from themselves. Next is, so let's get to the actual, the white elephant in the room and the big talking point, which has been the Kurtley Beale and Ashley-Cooper being disciplined and therefore dropped from this game against England because of a protocol breach. Now, that all sounds very legalese, and Paul, let's explain what really happened. So what appears to have happened is that Ashley-Cooper's sister-in-law and two of her friends have come back to a room with Ashley-Cooper and Kurtley Beale and left by 10:30 p.m. So they've not stayed there overnight or anything like that. No one is, no one's suggesting that anything has happened there. I mean, this is a guy's brother, sister-in-law. He's not going to be, who knows? But hopefully, this is basically what's happened here is that they've wanted some private time away from the public who are asking for photographs and signatures, and just want somewhere they can go private and chat. That's one end of it. The other end of the spectrum, obviously, I'm not going to go there. But if we assume that the best side is that that's what's happened, then clearly, fine, there's been a protocol breach that they've had guests in their bedroom, but there has got to be a question of what's the spirit of the protocol and what's the actual letter of the protocol. Every single law in the land has an exception to it. And I see Cheika's gone and said, "Hey, we've had an inconsistent season because we've often taken shortcuts." And he's saying that it would have been a shortcut to play these two players in this game to try and win it. To me, that's, two things there. One, if you have been taking shortcuts too often, that's your own fault, and it's been led, and culture is top-down driven. So you have allowed that to happen, and it's something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. So taking those shortcuts was clearly the wrong option. But as I say, that seems to be the history of Cheika's coaching or management style, is taking shortcuts. Having policies in place, the important thing here, is that players understand the spirit of it, rather than necessarily the letter of the policy. And I think this is a wrong, there was an opportunity here to say, look, the thing is to say you don't bring girls back and basically sleeping with them and stuff. Having, members of family is a different thing. They needed some privacy. If you're on tour for the length of time these guys now have been, because they've been in Europe for 3 games. Before that, they were in Japan. They've been away from home for sort of 5 or 6 weeks at least, living in hotel rooms and in hotel lobbies with very little privacy and places to go that are home, that they can relax when they're not under the prying eye of somebody's mobile phone or getting tapped on the shoulder for a photo. Now, you can say, hey, that's part of the job, and hey, fame comes with it. It does, but for 5 weeks of constantly not being able to just sit down, relax, does seem it would be a bit. It's going to test anybody. Let's be honest. So that's Cheika's point of view. Personally, I think they may have been overly zealous here with the protocols. There's going to be some serious question marks around Michael Hooper, though, as well. So Michael Hooper's admitted that they were aware of what happened last week before the Italy game, but decided not to tell the coach until early this week. And here's the quote to go with that. "We were well into the week, so the idea was to focus on the game to get through that and then deal with it afterwards. I'm sorry, Michael Hooper, but you made a bad decision here. You need to flag these things straight away, nip them in the bud, deal with them there and then. Pushing things to one side to deal with later, it just makes the optics of it all a lot worse. These things need to be dealt with there and then, and the faster they're dealt with, the faster they're put to bed, the better things would have been." And Michael Hooper should have told Michael Cheika last week before the Italy game, and then the Cheika could have then made a choice as to whether he made the decision then or made it now. Instead, Hooper's gone and put him in a difficult situation. So yeah, I think Hooper. Hooper's someone that I'm not convinced of as a captain and making the right choices. Earlier this year, and I can't remember which game it was in, but Australia made a poor start, and it was Will Genia that pulled all the players together and gave them all a talking to and got them pointing in the right direction. It wasn't Michael Hooper. You see some question marks there as to who is really leading this team, who's really the captain, the leader of this crowd. It doesn't feel like it's Michael Hooper. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on Cheika and Michael Hooper in this incident. Another thing that came up in the Green and Gold Rugby podcast, was something that, to be fair, Larkham might have said off the record, but hey, it's been said on a podcast now. He's reportedly saying something that they were lacking rugby brains out on the pitch, and that they're trying to develop them by basically getting to make decisions, and that's part of what's happened. That's part of what's led to this drop off in results that we've seen. And again, I guess something like the All Blacks saying, "Hey, we're trying to change our style." We're hearing that actually Australia are trying to develop, or perhaps change their style as well, to something that is more player led than it is process and system led. Now, this close to Rugby World Cup now, is that the time to be doing it? I don't know, a year out. Are they still in a position that they can do that? I'm not sure, but it seems a bit strange to me to suggest they haven't got rugby brains. You've got players like Beale and Foley, and if they haven't got rugby brains by now, they're never going to have rugby brains. Let's be honest. These guys, they're not young guys, or well, they are young guys compared to me. Hey, I'm in my 40s. But they're not young in terms of early in their career. These guys are experienced players. Looking at, say, Genia's in there too, Pocock, Hooper. These guys have all been around for some time now. If they haven't got rugby brains, they're unlikely to start suddenly developing one at this stage of their careers. So you need to adapt your plans, adapt your style of play to them. So that's just my thoughts there on what's going on, because I think a lot of the people who have been saying that Cheika is a good coach. I mean, hey, he's got a Super Rugby belt, title under his belt. He's got them to the Rugby World Cup final. He's hardly a bad coach. I'm not sure that the backroom staff and the assistants he's got are up to scratch, unfortunately. Obviously, Larkham has, it's looked like he's been someone that Australian Rugby have trying to guide through to become the Wallaby coach at some point. How successful that's being, I don't know. Some other points that I want to throw out there, and this is about coaching in general, actually. But actually, before I get to that, please, if you could hit the old subscribe down below. I'd love to try and get to 2,000 by the end of the year, so that'd be great to get my numbers up. So please do subscribe to the channel. We're looking at sort of coaches here. We're talking about shortcuts here with Cheika and how he turned things around quickly for the Rugby World Cup. We've talked about Eddie Jones and how he's somebody who pushes the players so hard. He's someone who gets a good response out of them, but then you find that only lasts so long, and hence we saw that fantastic 2016 out of England and it faded somewhat in 2017, and obviously 2018 has been a poor year for them initially. He's then brought in another coach who's quite famous for having a sort of dead cat bounce or an immediate effect that tapers off in John Mitchell. And maybe that's, we've said, we've looked at a lot of his teams, they do well for a year or so, and then they get really upset with him, have had enough of him, and it fades off. Maybe bringing in John Mitchell just before a year of the Rugby World Cup is a masterstroke for Eddie Jones there in that sense. What this might all be behind is just the increased pressure that you have to have results. Are coaches given time to build squads, to build players, to develop players and develop styles, or are they told you have to start winning immediately? And so they take these shortcuts rather than planning for the long term, and that becomes their entire coaching style, and they don't necessarily know how to change out of that. So that's just a thought to throw out there, that this whole pressure, professionalisation, etc. of rugby has led to that kind of thing where the coaches aren't doing long-term plans anymore. They're doing fairly short-term ones. So it's been a bit of a kind of a downing video. Let's finish this on and up. Congratulations, Canada. You're in the Rugby World Cup. Well done for beating Hong Kong. You had a bit of pressure early on, but you sustained that and then basically controlled the game from then out. Good things happening in Hong Kong, but well done to Canada for making it to the Rugby World Cup. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel up there, please. And there's 2 videos here and here that you will absolutely adore.